Good morning, everyone. It is Thursday, June the 25th, 2020. It is currently 8:53 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Victory Baptist Church, located here in Ovalo, Texas. And this is a new episode of the Non-Catholic Catholic Podcast. Me, right here, the person speaking to you, I'm the Non-Catholic Catholic. Now, the reason I use this title for this podcast, if you do not know, is, well, I'm obviously a non-Catholic. However, as a Baptist minister, I attended a Catholic university in order to get to get a degree in Catholic theology. Okay, if I can speak right today. Yes, I am not a professional broadcaster, as you can tell. No. Okay, I apologize. I apologize for already messing up. But no, as a Baptist minister, I attended a Catholic university to get a degree in Catholic theology so that I could speak, hopefully, on the subject of Catholicism from a point of knowledge, not a point of ignorance. As a Baptist church, we've done things that most Baptist churches would never do. We are studying the Catholic catechism. We've taken a little break, but we have studied, and we will continue to study the Catholic catechism. We've studied dogmatic constitutions from Vatican II. We've studied the 7 ecumenical councils. We've studied so much of church history, Catholic documents. We have studied it, and we've always tried to study it. Listen, with the goal, this is very important, with the goal of understanding, with the goal, listen, that, hey, if we are wrong, then we should change our view and change our perspective. We have studied Catholic theology in many cases in order to, listen to me, not to learn theology, but to do theology. And doing theology is very different than learning theology. Learning theology, you have a systematic theology. You have a theological text like the Catholic catechism, or, it could be any kind of a theological text. And you read it and say, this is what we believe. You just learn what it teaches, and then you adopt that teaching as your own. Doing theology, you take a theological text and you start asking questions, you analyze, you come up with maybe a completely different view, you challenge, you test, you come up with hypotheses, you test that, you challenge, you change. It's a process, and doing theology is very, very different. So one of the reasons I will bring in a Catholic theological text to my church is because I want to force my people not just simply to learn a theological system, but to be challenged to question their own theological beliefs and to struggle. So I that's one of the reasons we do these types of things. And so I created this podcast that whenever I wanted to address things related to Catholicism, anything related to Catholicism, any of the teaching we do at our church that relates to Catholicism, it could all be found in one podcast, very easy for people to discover and find, and for people who are not interested in hearing anything related to Catholicism, they could easily avoid it, all right? So that's what my goal was, and we do all kinds of things on this podcast. We will listen to a Catholic homily, and then I will analyze it. We will, anything, basically Catholic news, anything that's going on, we can talk about it right here. And I still don't feel like I have my footing yet here for this podcast. I have so many podcasts trying to do so many different things that sometimes causes a little bit of neglect, or I feel like I really don't have my footing yet and really what my direction is and where I'm going. The COVID-19 situation really messed everything up because we were studying the Catholic Catechism as a church. So those messages were being recorded, during a Sunday night service or a Wednesday night service or a Sunday school hour. And once COVID-19 happened and we stopped meeting, well, I didn't really want to do that teaching like what I'm doing right now, like in a podcast in an empty room. I wanted my people present so they could be asking questions and that we could be having a little bit of back and forth as they struggled with some of the concepts we were seeing in the Catholic Catechism. So we're going to get back to that, but after, by the time the COVID-19 situation, it's not really over yet. In fact, here in Texas, we're breaking records with more COVID-19 cases. So I don't know what's going to happen. But during that whole time of not meeting together, we kind of, the focus changed, and now we're kind of doing some different things. We are studying a Catholic book. We're studying The Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis as a church. But I haven't posted that in the non-Catholic or the non-Catholic podcast. I've posted that under the VBC podcast. So yes, we talk about a lot of things related to Catholicism. I am the non-Catholic Catholic because a lot of times people, I'm almost referred to as a Catholic sometimes. And my Catholic professor said I was the most Catholic non-Catholic he had ever met. One of my Catholic professors said that. So that's what we try to do here. We try to talk about Catholicism. Now, sometimes issues pertaining to Catholicism pop up in some very strange places. All right. Yesterday, one of my friends, he has a YouTube channel. If you want to look for his YouTube channel, just do a search for Michael-knipp. That's K-N-I-P-P. Michael-knipp, K-N-I-P-P. He has a YouTube channel dedicated to books, right? He reads books, reviews books, and it's all about books. So if you want to hear someone talk about books, recommend books, discuss books, you can subscribe to his channel. He's doing really well. It's been very successful. He's kind of found his own little kind of area where obviously there is an audience for it. He's producing really good videos, and he's doing a really good job. So congratulations to him and all of his success. But he has been reading this very large fantasy series. And the name of the series, I don't even remember. It's really irrelevant to this discussion. But he has been doing some videos in regards to this large fantasy series of books. All right. They're very large. And it seems that in one of and I don't know if this is true in all of the books, a religion in one of the books. And he was drawing a correlation between the religion in the book and Catholicism. So he did a video where he tried to compare these two ideas. And as a result, he did kind of a brief summary, kind of a history of maybe a little bit of church history. And it was very brief. And he was, just trying to offer a very, very basic summary. And somewhere in his summary that he offered, he mentioned some things. And someone responding to his video brought up some issues pertaining to Catholicism and church history. And, when I read what that person said, I was like, well, wait a minute. I've got some questions. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to play the audio of the video that sparked all of this, because this is what sparked the conversation. I'm going to read the comment that was posted under the video. I will briefly read what I responded to, and then we're going to expand it a little bit, and we're going to jump into some history. We're going to talk about the Spanish Inquisition. We're going to talk a little bit about church history. We're going to end up with a very important question about corruption. So I hope this is beneficial, and I think it will give us plenty to think about. But listen carefully. What I need from you is I'm going to need you to put on your thinking caps. I'm going to need you to possibly do your own research, and together we'll see what we find. So there's a lot of things I want to accomplish here, but I don't really know which direction I want to go. There, part of me just wanted to turn on the microphone and say, hey guys, here's a question in regards to the Spanish Inquisition. True or false? Do your own research, and then contact me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, and then I'll come back and then see what everyone discovered. But then I'm like, well, there's a lot here I kind of want to discuss. So literally I'm live on the air trying to figure out which direction I want to go. Have you ever been live on the air and go, well, I don't really know if I want to do that. Well, that's where I am this morning. So hopefully this will work. So let's just jump in and see where we end up. That's really the goal of this episode. We're going to jump in and we're going to see where we end up. I have a feeling that we may end up somewhere far different than we start, but that's okay. So let's go to the video that sparked all of this. I'm going to play the audio. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I just want you to kind of hear how he started, his little summary, And then we'll jump into the comment that was left under there that really raised all of the questions. So I think that's the best way to start because that's how this all started. So we're going to start with where this started. I saw that my friend had posted a new video. It dealt with Catholicism. Obviously, that's going to get my attention. So I hit play. I'm like, okay, all right. Kind of a very brief summary. All right, no big deal. Then I look down, like, whoa, wait. Someone went in and really threw in some things out there about Catholicism. And then I was like, well, I've got to say something. And so, well, here I am saying even more. So are you ready? Here we go.
Hey everybody, my name is Michael-knipp, and I feel like I should probably start this video off addressing the elephant in the room. Does my face look swollen and or red? If you see something wrong with my arms, I just want you to know I got into a battle with a poison ivy or some other poison type plant, and I lost. If you wonder why it's been a while since I recorded a video, a lot of the reason is because my vanity did not allow me to want to record a video when this half of my face was so swollen at one point my eye was barely open. Poison ivy is no joke. Nevertheless, that's not what I want to talk about here today. I want to talk about the Stormlight Archive. Specifically, the major religion in the Stormlight Archive, that is, Vorinism. Now, maybe I'm drawing conclusions and patterns where there were none intended, but after I read this massive church history, I think it was called Church History in a Plain Language, something like that, I'll show a picture of it, last year, I felt like I got a good survey overview for some basic church history. This is not anything major. I have some serious church history friends, and they're probably going to just crap all over anything that I say here, but this is some basic understanding that I have, and I thought that it was interesting that I personally believe Brandon Sanderson specifically chose to use a lot of parallels between the history of the Catholic Church and Vorinism in the Stormlight Archive. I think there's a lot of very similar comparisons, and coming up, I'll put a pin in this, but I think there's a very specific instance where, to me, it just seems like a blatant he's trying to parallel something. But I'll let you decide that for yourselves. I'll talk about that in a little bit. First of all, I'm going to give some basic very basic church history. That way this might make some sense. If that's not of interest to you, I'm sorry, it is of interest to me, and I hope it's of interest to at least some of you. So in its most basic form, the Christian faith in the New Testament spawns from the teachings of Jesus when he was here on earth, and then he had his apostles that he taught directly, and when he died, those apostles became the primary leaders in the church. They were the people that were speaking directly for God, and the writings of those apostles are what make up the New Testament. Those books, those letters that those apostles wrote are the primary fundamental core of Christian doctrine. They include the Gospels, which is the teachings of Jesus when he was on earth, and they also include the letters that the apostles sent to other churches because they were not able to be everywhere at once. Because this all happened at a time when there was not easy ways to spread information, they would write these letters and they would try to copy them and circulate them, but there wasn't a very established way to present a canonized single book that people would use as their source for theological information. So a lot of this was passed down from teachers who would teach other people, who would teach other people. One of the major significant things in the Catholic Church was having a sort of lineage back to the original apostles who have their lineage in their teaching back to Jesus. So there was a very important element in the early Catholic Church that the direct teachings of Jesus went to the apostles. Those apostles trained people directly. Those people trained people directly, and that direct lineage back to the original teaching was very important in the early church for how doctrine and theological debates and questions were sort of solved and reasoned out among the early church. Throughout history, there would be councils where issues would come up and the church would have to dispute and figure out how to solve them, theological, philosophical, cultural, etc. And they would have church councils, and then these people would come together, and basically the people who had that direct lineage back to the original sources as much as possible held more authority. The ultimate goal of the church was to maintain the sort of divinical mandate and rulings for the the people that served God. It took a significant amount of time to actually fully canonize the Bible as we have it today. But even after it was canonized, there was a lot of debates and different ways to interpret the Bible itself. And then you had church councils try to figure that out. And basically, the church as a organization, once that was allowed, basically determined doctrine, and that became the standard for everyone. In a situation where there's not a lot of people that are educated, there are not a lot of people that could even read the canonized scripture in their own language, there's a lot of pros to that, which is the people that are able to study this and have that direct teaching lineage back to the original source, they're able to present that information in the most reasoned and accurate way according to these traditions. And that's kind of the potential problem, right? If you're just having people pass things down through traditions, you're having a lot of people involved. And whether you're religious or not, people being involved in things always tends towards negative things. Bad things happen. People screw things up. That's kind of a universal truth. You take good things, you add people, the things become bad over time. That's the way of life. In the early section of the early church, the Christians were persecuted. Their religion was sometimes deemed to be against the governmental law, so they would use Christians as the scapegoats for any other thing that came out. It was kind of like a witch hunt. Basically, if something bad happened, you blame the Christians, you burn some of them, you say they were claiming to overthrow the government. It was just a thing that happened. Christians were the expendable resource until Constantine. Constantine came along, supposedly had a conversion, and then made Christianity, because of his personal decision, made Christianity the official government religion. I am sure that everyone who is interested in this video and has made it to this point knows the term separation of church and state. I know at least in the United States of America, there is the idea that the church and the state should be separate. People should be free to choose the religion that they personally adhere to. And one of the rights that people are supposed to have in the United States of America is freedom of religion, free to practice the religions that they feel convicted to do so with. I ended that with a preposition. Screw it. When Constantine made Christianity the official governmental religion for Rome, that was just a very different type of scene, because then Christianity became like government enforced, and it really got sketchy when the religious leaders and the political leaders the lines became extremely blurred. It doesn't take a big imagination to imagine the types of scandals and like just sketchy things that can happen when you have your religious leaders enforcing a religion on people, and decisions get made politically that have to do for religious reasons, and religious decisions get made for political reasons. Like these two things mixing, it's not ideal, and there's a reason why countries don't want that. On one hand, Christians were free to practice the religion that they believed in. On the other hand, they were mandated to practice it in a certain way, and people who did not believe in that religion were also forced to practice it. It's a very, very different way of thinking about religion, because the way we think about it today is it is extremely personal and unique to individuals or small groups of people that believe the same way. When you have a state religion, it's not like that. Everyone technically is under that religion, even if they don't really personally care. It's very blanket, and it's very impersonal, and it's very political. And then if the church is supposed to be like bringing forth the teachings of God with any sort of consistency, but then they are suddenly making decisions based on political reasons because they are suddenly intermingled with politics, it's a broken system. It's a very bad system. It was extra bad when the church decided that it was their job to punish people for not following the religion correctly, and if there was religions that sprang up that differed from the state religion, they killed them. That was the only way to enforce the canon and the doctrine that they had established. You could enforce it with force, and then everyone would believe the same thing because you would kill any dissenters, right? Additionally, things changed. Over time, doctrines kind of got changed or added, or had the ability to be changed or added. And I'm not going to say that every single person in the religious hierarchy, from the apostles to the the descendants of the Catholic Church really had the best ideas for the church in mind. It's a broad subject. It's really sketchy and bad. And we'll just say that at times it was super corrupt, very, very, very corrupt. Now, in our world, you had an event called the Reformation, which was this cataclysmic event for the Catholic Church that created the religious type systems that we know today, where everyone was able to obtain a Bible and everyone was able to study the Bible as their primary source for believing what they wanted to, instead of the Catholic Church, which brought a whole host of things, including people being able to interpret things however they wanted to instead of no formalized, agreed upon interpretation. And at that point in history, I'm very, very much oversimplifying it, but at that point in history, everything had the potential to become completely individualized, and the unity that was in the church would never, to this day, never be able to exist again. The church is unable to maintain its doctrinal authority without forcing people to believe something through literal force. And when everyone is able to interpret the holy text however they want to, obviously, I'm oversimplifying. I'm a religious person. I'm not trying to give too negative a spin on it, but let's just face it. That's why we have a billion denominations today, because people interpret things differently. They fragment into different groups. We could talk about that all day long, but I want to draw now the comparisons to what I think we see in the Stormlight Archive. We know.
Okay, there's his very, 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 very brief summary of history, somewhat pertaining to the Catholic Church. Now, we could talk about a lot of things he said. We could talk about the subject of apostolic succession. He was trying to explain apostolic succession. That's key. Is apostolic succession true? Is it false? Was there a period of apostolic succession and then that concluded? Do we still look for apostolic succession? If we do, who has apostolic succession? Is it only the Catholic Church? And if apostolic succession is true, that, hey, you had the apostles, then they pass, then their successors have the same authority and the same power as the original apostles, and whoever has that apostolic succession, Catholic Church would claim they do, then they have the same power and the same authority as the apostles to decree what is to be believed, what is to decreed as heresy, and their declarations, what their declarations of dogma are absolute and are true and are binding on everyone else because they have the power of the apostles. They have the authority that was handed down to them, apostolic succession. Now, either you accept that or you reject that. And that gets into a whole argument. So we could discuss that. Now, he also talked about persecution of Christians. Then there was this merging of church and state, and then people would be persecuted, killed, punished for believing something that is false or believing something that is heretical. Now, he kind of said the church would punish them, and this gets into a big argument in church history. We could really have to discuss this. Who carried out the punishment? Was it the church or was it the civil authorities? Did the civil authorities carry out the punishment? The church is the one that deemed this is true, this is false, that is heresy. Then the government utilized its civil authority, its power, to then carry out the punishment and the suffering. So it wasn't really the church doing it. We could get into a long discussion about this. So those are two issues he brought up that we could discuss. There is a third issue he brought up that I think is very, 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 very important. And we may be able to return to this at some point. I don't know if we'll get into it in this episode, but I definitely want to return to this. You take people, and whenever there's people, ultimately it turns, I think he uses the idea, it turns bad. There's corruption. People corrupt something. So all religion has people. So if people are a corrupting force, then is all religion corrupted? Right? So either one, you have to believe that, well, there are corrupt people, but somehow that corruption, God protects the religion, quote unquote, from truly being corrupted, even though there is corrupt people. All right. Now, how does that work? Well, you get into, because in Catholicism, you can even have the magisterial authority, the people who have the highest authority, be corrupt. But Catholics believe that corruption never actually influenced the actual doctrine and teaching of the church, that somehow it was protected by God. Others would say, well, wait a minute. If all the people were corrupt, how would their dogmas and their teachings not be corrupted? This gets into a whole Catholic teaching about, the Pope can be infallible, even though the Pope is as a human being is fallible and corrupt. At certain times, he can issue an infallible dogma that is then binding because of being protected by God. This gets into a discussion, but it does raise the question: if corruption is everywhere, then is there any religion that's not corrupt? Now, this almost takes a very, antagonistic view of religion, almost an atheistic, agnostic view of religion, and we could get into a discussion about how that would work and how do we understand that. So there's lots of questions his little summary could bring up, and we could spend a couple of months trying to unpack them. So I was fascinated by that. I wasn't so much fascinated about the parallel between Catholicism and the book because I haven't read the book. The Stormlight Archives, I think is what he called it. And I'm probably never going to read a book. I don't even remember how many thousands of pages the books are. I think they're the thousands and thousands of pages. And so, I try to be careful. I've got enough things to pull me in different directions. And so the next thing you know, if I'm not careful, if I'm reading all of those things, then my Bible reading, the things of God get pushed to the back burner. And then basically everything else becomes taking my time, my attention, and my focus, and it becomes a form of idolatry. So I always have to be very careful what I engage in, or then God gets pushed to the bottom of the pile, which is not where he's supposed to be. So that's why I'm not playing his correlation between the two. You can look up his channel on YouTube, Michael-knipp, and you can go watch it for yourself. So that was his summary. There's a lot of different directions comments could have went. We could have talked about so many of those different issues, and I think all of them would be very pertinent to what he had to say. But if you are a Catholic, and he's trying to give you somewhat of a summary of Catholic Church history, you may go, wait a minute. I think he's trying to make, it's trying to really make Catholicism look kind of bad. You could possibly perceive it as being somewhat negative. Now, one of the things that bothers me sometimes about Catholics is that anytime anyone says anything negative towards Catholicism, you say anything negative towards Catholicism, anything negative about church history as it relates to Catholicism, you're immediately branded as anti-Catholic, anti-Catholic, anti-Catholic. Now, this is very important for everyone, whether you're a Protestant, whether you're a Catholic, whether you're an atheist, it doesn't matter. We look to history to find out truth, right? And what the history is the history, whether it makes your group look good or makes your group look bad. And someone speaking that history does not necessarily mean that they're anti-Catholic or anti-Protestant. I speak a lot about the negative consequences that resulted from the Protestant Reformation. Am I anti-Protestant? I can speak about a lot of the history of the United States of America that I think was really bad. Am I anti-American? When you speak the truth about things that have happened that make your group look bad, that doesn't mean that you're anti-Catholic. Right? There are things in church history that Catholics should say, that was messed up. That doesn't make you an anti-Catholic. That makes you as trying to be honest with the history. There are things in Baptist history. There are things in every group. Because guess what? Where there are people, there is corruption and there is sin. To speak about the negative things that happen, or to speak about negative consequences or negative teaching or negative practices does not make one anti-Catholic. And I just hate that so many times you talk about Catholicism and you say anything negative towards Catholicism. You criticize it. You challenge it. Then you're an anti-Catholic. And it's like, stop running to that, like, anti-Catholic. How about just someone offering a critique of Catholicism, and how about you respond to the critique with facts and information and not just call it an anti-Catholic thing? I see that way too many times, and it's really irritating, bothers me to no end. Let's just deal with the facts, and let's not label something, oh, look, that book criticizes Catholicism. It's anti-Catholic. Or maybe the criticism has some historical foundation, historical basis, and some of the criticism is based on fact. It doesn't make it anti-Catholic, right? So let's just keep that in mind. But he posted that video. He started getting a lot of comments, a lot of views, But one comment jumped out and got my attention. Now, again, I would love to talk about all the things I just pointed out. Apostolic succession, who actually carried out the killing and the persecution of people. Was it the church or was it the state? They merged, so who was doing which part? Okay, we could talk about corruption within religion. Therefore, if people corrupt things, then is there any pure religion anywhere? A lot of different concepts we could talk about. And trust me, if there's any of those that you want to discuss, email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, and I'll be more than happy to jump in and really expand on some of those things. However, it is the one comment that I really want to discuss here. So are we ready? I'm going to read this. All right. This was posted 20 hours ago. I'm not going to give the name of the individual because this is no attack upon the individual in any way, shape, or form. I'm not trying to embarrass the individual, not trying to do anything like that. I'm just trying to engage some of the things said here because it brings up a lot of issues that I think we need to discuss. All right, so here we go. This person posted 20 hours ago. Hey, I like your channel and your views, but the Catholic Church history you read is clearly written by very anti-Catholic Protestants. There you have it. There you have it. Okay. Anti-Catholic Protestants. If you write a history that points out some of the negative things that have happened within church history related to Catholicism, then you're a very anti-Catholic Protestant. That's just... That is so the only books you can read, I guess, are the ones who tell you how wonderful the Catholic Church is. So I guess when people look back and I guess 20 years from now, if someone writes a book talking about all of the sex abuse scandal dealing with children and Catholicism and the covering up, hiding, moving priests from one parish to another, all the things that the Catholic Church has done, the billions of dollars of payout to victims. Hey, don't write anything negative about how the Catholic authorities handled that. Don't talk about all the abuse of children at the hands of Catholic priests. No, because you'll be a very anti-Catholic Protestant. No, that really happened. The scandal has been huge. I watch EWTN a lot and I watch their news programs. They've been very critical of what has happened in regards to some of these things. That doesn't make you an anti-Catholic. Okay. Just because you write a history book that points out some of the very bad things that happened within Catholicism does not make you an anti-Catholic. See, that's the card that always gets played, and it drives me crazy. And when Protestants do the same thing, oh, here's a Catholic book, and it points out some of the things in Protestant history. Oh, they're anti-Protestant. Just stop with that. Stop with that. Don't label something anti-pro. Just say, here's what they claimed, and then let's look at the facts. Did they claim something that was factually an error? Did they make a mistake? Did they misinterpret history? Demonstrate that. But when you call something anti-Catholic or anti-Protestant, what you're doing is you're discounting the whole of the book, the whole of the story, by simply saying, well, they're anti-Catholic, so you can't trust it. And as far as I can tell, I don't know if this person had ever even he says, but the Catholic Church history you read is clearly written by very anti-Catholic Protestants. Now, I don't know if this person's actually read the book. I don't know if he's actually read the book because I think the book is pretty fair and balanced for the most part. I think most people have read the book feels that it's very balanced. Now, when I'll pretty say it's pretty balanced. I won't try to use the word very because that offers some, that's describing it in a more intensive way, but I think it's considered by most to be pretty balanced, all right? Now, this person says, I have been a church historian for 2 decades now, and it is much more complex, subtle, and deeper than it was described. Well, obviously, it's going to be more complex, more subtle, and more deeper than it was described because the person Michael spoke for 10 minutes. He covered 2,000 years of church history in like 10 minutes. Okay. Obviously, it's got to be more complex, subtle, and deeper than it was described. Obviously. Right. Now, here we go. You paint the picture that the church was overrun with unchecked corruption. All right. Now, this gets to the level of corruption. How corrupt was it? By the time you get to the 1500s and Luther is looking around going, man, this place is a mess. How bad was the corruption? How bad was the corruption? Now, I don't think Michael ever said unchecked. I don't think he ever said those words. So now we're going to get into, was there 40% corruption, 60% corruption, 50% corruption, 80% corrupt, or can we just say there was corruption? There was corruption. There is corruption. There will always be corruption. And the reason there was corruption, there is corruption, and there will be corruption is because human beings are corrupt. We are sinners by nature. We have a sinful nature. All right? So there will always be some level of corruption. Now, was it unchecked? Well, you can debate that historically. He goes, but every time a corrupt person held power in the church, a faction or a saint rose up to challenge them and eventually return the church to the truth. All right. Well, if you're returning the church to the truth, then that acknowledges there was a time the church obviously was not holding to the truth, that they had turned from the truth. And if any time the church has turned from the truth, then at that point, are they not corrupt and then are returned back to a point of non-corruption? Right. All right. Also, the actual dogma or doctrine of the church has never been corrupted by a pope or other leader. Now let's stop right there. I have a list of all the dogmas of the Catholic Church. We have certain dogmas there, sometimes referred to as the Marian dogmas. Now, you look some of the dogmas issued about Mary. Now look, if you are a Catholic, guess what? You're going to believe all the dogmas are absolutely true, are absolutely right, and absolutely pure because your theology demands you accept all the dogmas as being right, as being true, as being pure, because you believe in apostolic succession. You believe in apostolic succession. You believe the successors of the apostles, who then therefore have the keys, have the power, have the authority, can sit in the chair, can declare something to be a dogma, and it's a dogma. It's a dogma. And if you're Catholic, you have to accept that dogmatic declaration, no matter what it may be. Because you don't have do you have the power? Do you have the power, therefore, to ever say a dogma is incorrect? Do you or do you not? Now, if you believe in apostolic succession, then you don't. So guess what? Your default position has to be that the dogmas are true, that the dogmas are right. So this becomes an argument of you first have to deal with how you get there. You get there by believing in apostolic succession, believing that power was given to the church. Therefore, you cannot believe that any dogma issued by the church is corrupt because your default position is it cannot be corrupt because the church has the power to issue these dogmas, and these dogmas are therefore infallible. All right, well, then guess what? Now it's circular reasoning. None of the dogmas are corrupt. Why? Because they can't issue a corrupt dogma. Therefore, they're not corrupt. Well, I can't argue with you there. We would have to go back to argue apostolic succession. We would have to argue whether that's true or false. We would have to argue, now this is very important, if the church issues a dogma that the Bible doesn't even mention or doesn't even speak of, or let's say they issued a dogma that clearly contradicts the Bible. Now, what we would say is if I say it contradicted the Bible, you would say, well, I don't have the power or the authority to interpret the Bible because the Catholic Church is the only one who has the power to offer an authoritative interpretation of Scripture. So if I, as a Protestant, say, I believe that dogma is wrong based off the Bible, you would say that I misinterpreted the Bible because guess what? Only the Church can then give the authoritative interpretation of the Bible. So ultimately, you can't lose. From a Catholic perspective, this is the way it works. They have the right and the power and the authority given to them by God to issue a dogma. The dogma can't be wrong because they issued the dogma, and they have the authority to do so. If it goes against the Bible, Well, they would just say that anyone claiming it goes against the Bible doesn't interpret the Bible correctly because they have the authority and the right to interpret the Bible. Therefore, there's no way to argue against them, right? Luther came along and said, hey, guys, I think you're wrong here. I think you're wrong about this. I think you're doing this wrong. You're wrong. You recant. I won't recant. You're gone. End of story. Because who's Luther? Who's Luther? So unless it's really weird, but you've already acknowledged that they could turn from the truth, but someone would always come back and return them to the truth. So is it possible that Luther was trying to return them to the truth and that the church messed up by not listening to Luther? Because you just argued that the church could turn from the truth, but then someone would rise up to turn them back to the truth. So wait. So they can turn from the truth. So someone else, but like he said, those who turn them back to the truth would be, let me see here, a faction or a saint would rise up to challenge them and eventually return them to the truth. Well, wait, is the faction a part of the magisterial authority? So you've got a non-magisterial authority turning the magisterial authority back to the truth? And a saint would not have been declared a saint at that time because they would have to be declared a saint later. So a saint who rose up would not be a saint at the time of rising up, telling the church that they were wrong. They would be declared a saint later. So at the time, they weren't a saint. So who were they? So this is just really weird the way this goes. So the actual dogma or doctrine of the church has never been corrupted by a pope or other leader. Again, that is based off your presuppositions. This is important to know. No corrupt officials ever officially changed the teaching or the Bible or of Christ. They may have done horrible things. They may have directed others to do horrible things, but the official dogma was never corrupted by them. Much of the dogma of the church is still the same today as it was in the early years of the church. Now, of course, they have to believe that. They have to believe, hey, they're corrupt people. They're doing horrible things, but they never corrupted any of the teaching of the church, ever. Now, as a Protestant, I would look at some of the declarations from the Council of Trent and where they pronounce an anathema upon us. And I would be like, well, I think that's wrong. But then again, I'm rejecting the authority because according to the Catholic teaching, they have the authority to declare that anathema. And if I'm on the wrong side of the anathema, I have to accept their authority and then submit to that authority because all of this presupposes that the Catholic Church has the apostolic succession, has the power, and has the authority. So it starts with that presupposition. And if you start with that presupposition, then you have to just say nothing could be, hey, they could do horrible things. They could be corrupt people, but they could not ultimately corrupt the teaching of the church. Now, Luther obviously disagreed. And a lot of other people throughout church history have disagreed. But if you disagree, then, well, you're in trouble because they're not presupposing the authority of them to do these things. All right. So very important. Now, this comes to the part I really want to talk about. This is important to know when it comes to some of the events in church history that cause many people to hate the church. The Spanish Inquisition was never sanctioned by Rome. This is an often overlooked fact because so many people have a hatred for the church. Now, I want to stop right there. The Spanish Inquisition was never sanctioned by the church. Now, this is supposedly a church historian who's been a church historian for 2 decades. All right, so someone who's a church historian for 2 decades, I will immediately step back and go, they know more than I do because I have not been a church historian for 2 decades. But it raises a very important, he makes this as a dogmatic claim. Right? That the Spanish Inquisition was not sanctioned by Rome. All right. All right. Now, this is where I need you to be detectives. I need you to be detectives. Is that true? Is that an absolutely true statement? And when it says not sanctioned, what do you mean by that? So I was like, well, man, I'm having a little hard time with this. I've taken a course on the Spanish Inquisition from a Catholic university. I've taken a course on the Crusades from a Catholic university. So I was like, man, I don't know. What do we mean by that? So is this a convenient way to say, hey, we did bad things, but hey, this was never sanctioned by the church, never sanctioned by the church. So there was an Inquisition going on, but it wasn't sanctioned by the church. So I guess it was civil authority run amok, just running around doing these things. Now, I will acknowledge that sometimes when it comes to the Crusades, comes to the Spanish Inquisition, that sometimes those things are very nuanced. You have to put them in the context of the time in which they occur. And you got to be very careful because people will exaggerate certain numbers, especially if it results in the number of the death of people. You can get all these sources saying this many people died, this many people died. And if you're not within Catholicism and you want to speak negatively of Catholicism, you'll go for the higher number. But if you're a Catholic, you'll go for the lowest number possible and go, no, not 1 million people died, only 6,000 people died. See, it wasn't that bad. I would say, well, even if you have 6,000 people dying, even if you have 30 dying, 40 dying. And again, to be fair, all kinds of Inquisition kind of ideas, they show up throughout church history in all kinds of different ways. Listen, this is why the merging of church and state, I always believe, is bad. Whenever church and state merge, people die. Whoever has the power and they're merged with the civil government, then they take their religious beliefs, make them law, and then anyone who doesn't follow along with their practice of their form of Christianity, anyone who doesn't go along with it is going to get punished. I hate the merging of church and state, completely opposed to it, and that's part of the Baptist. One of the things about Baptists is we do not like the merging of church and state. It's typically a Baptist kind of idea. So, but it raises an important question. Is that true? So I'm just going to give you a couple of things to think about here. All right. So let's go to the Spanish Inquisition and let's do a little bit of discussion here. All right. Now, the first word you probably want to write down is the word converso. Converso. I think converso is the right way to pronounce it. Converso. 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 All right. This and there I can look at the word in Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin. I have it all here in different forms here, but converso. All right. It means converted, turning around. A converso was a Jew who converted to Catholicism in Spain or Portugal. I don't know why I'm having a hard time with Portuguese or Portugal today. All right. Was a Jew who converted to Catholicism, particularly during the 14th and 15th centuries. A converso could be one of his or her descendants as well. So converso was a Jew who converted to Catholicism. All right. Keep that in mind. That's a very important historical term. All right. Converso. Now, why is this important? Well, when you get to start getting closer to the Spanish Inquisition, one of the things that led up to this, you begin to get waves of anti-Semitism that swept across medieval Europe. It finally made its way into Spain. Envy, greed, gullibility led to rising tensions between Christians and Jews in the 14th century. Now, I could talk about some things that happened in Barcelona. I think it was 1391. There was these mobs. They poured in. They rounded up the Jews. They gave them a choice of baptism or death. Most took baptism. The king of Aragon, who had done his best to stop the attacks, later reminded his subjects of well-established church doctrine on the matter of forced baptisms. They don't count. He decreed that any Jews who accepted baptism to avoid death could return to their religions. All right. So you had kind of this anti-Semitism thing beginning to go. And the conversos, well, they started, listen, this is very important, very important. The conversos started being viewed as being, and I guess I will use this term, secret Jews. There were actually Jews that were trying to infiltrate the church. They were pretending, but they were actually Jews, and this was becoming a major problem. All right. And so this began, and there were debates that occurred, and there were lots of major problems that happened. All right. By the mid 15th century, a whole new converso culture was basically, was spreading in Spain. Jewish in ethnicity and culture, but Catholic in religion. Conversos, whether new converts themselves or the descendants of converts, took enormous pride in that culture. Some even asserted that they were better than the old Christians, since as Jews they were related by blood to Christ himself. All right. So the expansion of conversos and the expansion of their wealth and power in Spain led to a backlash, particularly among many of the aristocratic and middle-class old Christians. They resented the arrogance of the conversos and envied their success. Several tracts were written demonstrating that virtually every noble bloodline in Spain had been infiltrated by conversos. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories abounded. The conversos, it was said, were part of an elaborate Jewish plot to take over the Spanish nobility and the Catholic Church, destroying both from within. The conversos, according to this logic, were not sincere Christians, but, are you ready for it? Secret Jews. You definitely need to know this history when dealing with the Spanish Inquisition. So, because of these accusations, this convinced King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella that the matter of secret Jews should at least be investigated. So they sent a request. The request went to Pope Sixtus, 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 Pope Sixtus. Now, I believe it was Pope Sixtus the Fourth, I believe, Pope Sixtus the Fourth, and he issued a papal bull on November the 1st, 1478. So he issued a papal bull on November the 1st, 1478. That's a very important date. This seemed to allow the crown, allow the civil authorities to form an inquisitorial tribunal. Okay, so they were basically, he was giving them the power and the authority to develop an Inquisition tribunal. Now, wait a minute. If he's issuing the bull and he's allowing them to do so, is he not sanctioning it? Is he not allowing it? Is Rome not involved to say, hey, they didn't sanction it. They had nothing to do with it. Then why was he issuing a papal bull, allowing them to do so, allowing the crown, allowing the civil authority to develop this tribunal? All right. As was now the custom, the monarchs would have complete authority over the inquisitors and the Inquisition. Now, this is very important. If he's giving them the power and they have the power, is he not sanctioning it? How can you say Rome did not sanction it? This is where I had a lot this is where I struggle a little bit trying to figure this out. 2 years pass before they finally appoint two men. They appoint two men to begin this, and this begins the Spanish Inquisition. According to at least one source, King Ferdinand seemed to have believed that the inquiry would turn up very little. He didn't think it was going to turn up anything big. However, he was wrong. Basically, there was a tinderbox of resentment and hatred exploded across Spain as the enemies of conversos, both Christians and Jews, came out of the woodwork to denounce them. Score settling and opportunism were the primary motivators. Nevertheless, the sheer volume of accusations overwhelmed the inquisitors. They asked for and received more assistance, but the larger the Inquisition became, the more accusations it received. At last, even Ferdinand was convinced that the problem of secret Jews was real. All right. And I could go back and I could read a lot of the things that happened, but I want to make sure. And this is very important. Pope Sixtus, everywhere they looked, the inquisitors found more accusers. As the Inquisition expanded, the hysteria levels reached new heights. So basically everybody was like, they're a secret Jew and they're a heretic and basically craziness. Pope Sixtus attempted to put a stop to it. On April the 18th, 1482, he wrote to the bishops of Spain. Now, please note, here's the Pope involved writing to bishops. All right. He says, the Inquisition has for some time been moved not by zeal for the faith and the salvation of souls, but lust for wealth. Many true and faithful Christians, on the testimony of enemies, rivals, slaves, and other lower and even lesser proper persons, have without any legitimate proof been thrust into secular prisons, tortured and condemned as relapsed heretics, deprived of their goods and property, handed over to the secular arm to be executed to the perils of souls, setting a pernicious example and causing disgust to many. So even the Pope acknowledges how bad the situation had gotten. Sixtus ordered the bishops to take direct role in all future tribunals. Well, if Sixtus can jump in and say, hey, the bishops are going to take a direct role in future tribunals, then not only did they sanction it, he had the power to allow it. He had the power to sanction it. He had the power to give the crown to do. I mean, like the Pope here obviously had some power. They were to ensure that the church's well-established norms of justice were respected. The accused were to have legal counsel and the right to appeal their case to Rome. Well, if they can appeal their case to Rome, then Rome is clearly involved. So how can you say they didn't sanction it? In the Middle Ages, the Pope's commands would have been obeyed, but those days were gone. King Ferdinand was outraged when he heard of the letter. He wrote to Sixtus openly, suggesting that the Pope had been bribed with converso gold. All right. So, and at this point, I think King Ferdinand, I think this is what he wrote. Things have been told me, Holy Father, which if true would seem to merit the greatest astonishment. To these rumors, however, we've given no credence because they seem to be things which would in no way have been conceded by your holiness, who has a duty to the Inquisition. But if by chance concessions have been made through the persistence and cunning persuasion of the conversos, I intend never to let them take effect. Take care thereof not to let the matter go further and to revoke any concessions and entrust us with the care of the question. That was the end of the papacy's role in the Spanish Inquisition. All right. So at this point, the Catholic Church then seems to lose all control over it, and then it's just the government who steps in. But it was a papal bull who allowed the crown to set up the tribunal. It was the Pope who stepped in, acknowledging things had gone out of control and people were being killed and put in prison and losing their property simply by accusations. It was the Pope who tried to stop it, and then King Ferdinand was basically like, no. Your job is to go along with it. And at that point, it seems historically that the church's involvement, they lose control. So they seem to clearly was at some point, not only did they sanction it, they allowed it and was involved in it and even tried to call for pulling some certain parts of it back. So I don't know how you can somehow just wash the hands and say, hey, they're all good to go. So I don't know. You can see what you can discover. I think this one will be debated forever. Put it this way. This is what I would say. I don't think you can get the church completely out of what happened. I just don't think it's fair. All right. So let's go back and read this again. The Spanish Inquisition was never sanctioned by Rome. This is an often overlooked fact because so many people have hatred for the church. But the church in Spain took it upon themselves to carry out the Inquisition. Right? So it was not sanctioned by Rome. We've got the papal bull who allowed it. We got the Pope trying to step back into it. He says, but the church in Spain took it upon themselves to carry out the Inquisition. So what he's arguing is it was just the church in Spain. The Pope was involved. So I don't know how you can say it wasn't sanctioned. It was a local event and very similar to what the post-Reformation Christian churches were doing in Northern Europe. Okay, well, there's no problem. Post-Reformation churches did a lot of things. Make sure. I've got to drive this point home. This is so important. Whenever Catholics, when you point out history, the things that went bad within Catholicism, and then they point the finger and go, but look what you Protestants did. You've got to at least stop and acknowledge the difference. The Catholic Church claims something that no Protestant church claims. You claim to have a divine authority, apostolic succession that allows you to offer a dogma. Everyone must believe the dogma. If we don't believe the dogma, then you can issue an anathema against anyone who doesn't believe it. And then at certain times in history, you also could then write a papal bull to call for an inquisition against anyone who supposedly was violating some truth. You're claiming an authority that no Protestant church claims. My church, we do not claim that kind of authority in any way, shape, or form. We believe the Bible has the authority. We don't believe that we have the authority the Catholic Church claims for itself. So whenever you point what other Protestants were doing, they were doing it, but they didn't have the authority. They never claimed for itself the authority that the Catholic Church claims for itself. That is always the major difference. And sometimes they get so overlooked in these discussions. Right? And then he's got one last paragraph. You made a great point when you said that anytime people get involved in something, it often gets corrupted. And there have been several bad popes, priests, and others involved with the church, as evidenced by the various abuse scandals over the past few decades. But there are few cases throughout human history of the victors rewriting history more egregious than what has been written against the Catholic Church as an institution. There have been some bad events sanctioned by the church, the Crusades probably being the worst. But I think it's important to understand here that the author of the book, who is a Mormon, that's the book that they're talking about, is likely not a fan of Catholicism. And as with all writers, he is influenced by his worldview. But it is a much more nuanced issue than many people would like to make it out to be. Just my 2 cents. Keep up the good work. Now, he does at least say the Crusades were sanctioned. I don't know how he's trying to get around the Pope's involvement in the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know how you could do that. And obviously the Pope knew it was happening. So if he didn't sanction it, why didn't he just write another papal bull or an encyclical letter going, we absolutely condemn the Spanish churches for doing this, and we're going to excommunicate all of the Spanish churches. We're going to throw out the Spanish churches. We're going to revoke them. We're going to kick out their priests. Everyone involved in the Spanish Inquisition is going to be excommunicated. No, he didn't do that. He didn't do that at all. Even when he said, hey, this is getting out of control, he didn't threaten. No. Why didn't he say, look, those churches are operating independently outside of the power of the Pope. They have broken away. They're rebels. They're doing horrible things. No, you don't see that in church history, and don't even claim that. Now, at some point, he does try to fix it, and then King Ferdinand is like, look, we've got to do what we've got to do. And so then at that point, the Pope seems to lose power. But if he seems to lose power, if there are any bishops, if there are any people of the Spanish churches carrying it out, he could have excommunicated them. So the church does have the power over the church. Okay, they may no longer have the power over the crown, but they still had power over the church. So, I mean, come on, you can't just wash your hands of that stuff. You cannot do that. So I just wanted to try to just point that out. Listen, here's the thing, and this is the point I want to make. I don't care if you're a Protestant. I don't care if you're a Catholic. I don't care if you're a Muslim. I don't care what religion you are. You have to acknowledge the wrongs done in the name of your religion. You have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge that. We can't hide from it. We have to face it. Some of the things that happened after the Protestant Reformation should be embarrassing to all Protestants. And we always try to play it down. Well, it really wasn't that bad. And you have to understand, we always try to don't make any excuses. Just say wrong was done. sin occurred. Now, the problem with the Catholic is you have to be very careful, because if you talk about too much corruption and too many problems, then you start questioning the authority of the church. You start questioning that apostolic succession. That's why Catholics have to protect it. In the Protestant world, we don't need to do that. Yeah. People are sinners and they did wrong things. Okay, that we just acknowledge, but everyone has to acknowledge. Americans have to acknowledge the wrong done in America. Every country has to admit the wrong done. There is corruption everywhere. Sinful people do sinful things. They do it in the name of religion. They do it without the name of religion. They do it with religion. They do it without religion. Atheists have done horrible things. Christians have done horrible things. Muslims have done horrible things. Agnostics have done horrible things. Everyone has, because the one thing that is true is we're all sinners and we're all corrupt. And to acknowledge that corruption and to acknowledge that sin, to me, screams for a very important theological distinction, right? This is important, that I am not going to be saved by cooperating with the grace of God and cooperating with some infused grace and working, and maybe I'll be good enough to get to purgatory, and then maybe someone can get me from purgatory to heaven. No, I need something far better than my ability. I need an imputed righteousness that is accredited in my account, that when I stand before God, he doesn't see all of my failure and all of my corruption, but he sees the perfect righteousness of his son, Jesus Christ, which is imputed, accredited to my account by faith. And I am saved by faith alone, because of grace alone, because of Christ alone, because guess what? Apart from a foreign righteousness accredited to my account, I am never going to stand right before God, because history is filled with human beings who are corrupt. No matter how spiritual they may be, no matter how great they may be, they are corrupt. King David was corrupt. Solomon was corrupt. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. The Bible is filled with corrupt men, because we're all sinners. So I think history screams for we needing a salvation far different than human effort, human ability, human work, and humans trying to somehow work with the grace of God. But I wanted to at least bring this there. You can do your own study. I know that was a little brief, jumping into the middle of some of the things that led up to the Spanish Inquisition, the whole secret Jew controversy, conversos, all of that controversy, King Ferdinand, Queen Isabella, Pope Sixtus, I think is how you say his name. I think it's Pope Sixtus IV. If I am wrong on which, then I apologize. I am positive it's the fourth. Okay. And those are just some brief notes that I had. There's far more information written there, but to say that they never sanctioned it, man, like that's given some impression that, hey, the church had nothing to do with it. And it's just not the case. The papal bull allowed the crown to pursue it. They jumped back in to try to get it under control. They lost control. But the Pope, if what this person is saying, and this person is a church historian for 2 decades, so they know more than I do. If they are correct that this was just the breakaway Spanish churches in Spain, these churches were just doing this outside of the approval of Rome. Rome had nothing to do with it. Rome obviously knew about it. So why didn't they just step in and stop it? Why didn't they tell the churches, cease right now? Right now, stop. You will stop right now. And if you do not stop, you're going to be excommunicated. They couldn't have stopped the crown, but they could have stopped the churches. They could have stopped bishops. They could have stopped priests. They could have stopped anyone involved. The idea of the Inquisition was approved and accepted. And there were other Inquisitions even before the Spanish Inquisition. All right? And then we can talk about all right. I'll stop right there. But there you go. Just sometimes when church history gets spoken of, I don't like the way anyone does church history. I really don't. I don't like how Protestants sometimes do church history. I don't like the way Catholics do church history. You know this is the way I always talk about church history. When you do church history, all you want are the facts, the good, the ugly, the bad. You want it all. And you just have to acknowledge that there was good, there was bad, and there was ugly. You just have to acknowledge it because there were corrupt people, which leads to the bigger philosophical question. If all religion is filled with corrupt people, then is there any way to ever have an uncorrupt religion? Well, religion is always going to be corrupted. Now, I would argue if we had, just think about this, if we had a book that was inspired by God, and that book was the authority, and no matter what we did, because we're corrupt, at least we would have some place to look that was, if we believe the Bible is the inspired word of God in written form, that God inspired it, that even though men were writing it, God overrode their corruption and gave us a book, 66 books, right? Perfectly the word of God. If I can go to that, even though I may corrupt it with my corrupt hands and my corrupt interpretation, at least everyone has some place to go to find something that is not corrupted. I may corrupt it with my interpretation, but the text is not corrupt. So I don't know. It does raise a very important philosophical question, but I won't dive too much into that. So here's your job. How involved, or is it true to say that Rome never sanctioned the Spanish Inquisition? That they did not sanction it. Rome wasn't involved, and it was just a bunch of churches in Spain that just kind of took it upon their own accord to start doing the Inquisition and putting people on trial and punishing people either with prison. I think the government was the one doing the imprisoning and punishing. But to say, I don't know. You can tell me what you think. You can email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. All right, I'll stop right there. Thanks for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.